What does it mean to disappear? In our hyper-connected world, a world of digital footprints and perpetual archives, the very idea of a true vanishing act feels like a relic from a bygone era. We think of disappearance as an absence, a void, a story cut short. But what if it's the opposite? What if disappearance isn't an ending, but a final, powerful act of creation? The creation of a private life, of a protected self, of a silence that speaks louder than any noise ever could. This is a story about such a disappearance. It's the story of a woman who built an empire in the neon-drenched, morally ambiguous heart of the 1980s. She was a monarch in a transient kingdom, a figure of such potent fame that her image became a cultural shorthand for an entire industry. She was a platinum blonde goddess who projected an aura of absolute unyielding control in a world designed to control women. Her name was Seka. For nearly a decade, she was a phenomenon. Her face graced hundreds of magazine covers. Her name was whispered in locker rooms and debated on daytime television. She wasn't just a star in the adult film world. For a time, she was the adult film world. She was intelligent, fiercely articulate, and a brilliant architect of her own myth. And then, at the absolute zenith of her power, when she was arguably the most famous adult entertainer on the planet, she did the one thing no one expected. She walked away. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, decisive click of a closing door. This is not a simple rise and fall narrative. This is a story of meticulous construction and deliberate deconstruction. It's the story of Dorothiea Hundley, the woman from the rolling hills of Virginia, and her epic, often agonizing journey to create her public self, and her even more courageous, more profound journey to reclaim her private one. To truly comprehend the meteoric rise of Seka, we must first immerse ourselves in the cultural crucible that forged her. The late 1970s in America were a period of profound cultural whiplash. The revolutionary fervor of the 1960s had cooled, leaving behind a complex legacy. The sexual revolution had happened, but no one was quite sure what the rules were anymore. This uncertainty created a unique cultural moment, a brief window of time often referred to as porn chic. Following the unprecedented mainstream success of films like 1972's Deep Throat and 1973's The Devil in Miss Jones, pornography stepped out of the shadows. For a moment, it became a subject of intellectual debate and cocktail party chatter. Newspapers reviewed adult films, and their stars, like Linda Lovelace and Georgina Spelvin, became household names. It was a strange, heady time when the lines between art, exploitation, and entertainment seemed to blur. This wasn't happening in a vacuum, of course. America was nursing a national hangover. The idealism of the 60s had curdled into the cynicism of the 70s, soured by the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. The economy was sputtering under stagflation, and a sense of malaise hung in the air. People were desperate for an escape, for something that felt loud, unapologetic, and intensely alive. They found it on the dance floors of disco clubs, under the fractured light of a mirror ball, and, surprisingly, in the darkened rows of those adult movie theaters. Critically, the technology had finally caught up with the ambition. This wasn't the grainy, silent 8mm stag loop someone might have kept hidden in a shoebox. These were feature-length productions shot on 35mm film with actual plots, however flimsy, dialogue, and budgets that, for the first time, allowed for a certain gloss and cinematic style. This technical leap was huge. It gave the genre a veneer of legitimacy. Suddenly, going to see an adult film could feel like a real night out. The audience changed too. It wasn't just men in raincoats anymore. Adventurous couples started going on dates to these places, treating it as a taboo thrill, a walk on the wild side that was suddenly, shockingly, almost acceptable. The industry had its first wave of stars, but it was still finding its feet, still figuring out its own identity in this new semi-mainstream world. It had proven it could be profitable, even fashionable, but now the scene was ready for something more. It was ready for an icon, a personality so potent, so electrifying, that she could not only star in these films but transcend them entirely. The stage was perfectly set for a platinum blonde firecracker who would come to define the era, a woman who wasn't just a participant in the scene, but who would become the scene itself. But this era was also giving way to a powerful counter-movement. A tide of social conservatism was rising, coalescing into what would become the moral majority. Figures like Jerry Falwell began harnessing television to preach a return to traditional values, railing against the perceived moral decay of the nation. America was a country at war with its own libido, a place of deep contradictions. Into this tumultuous landscape, a technological Trojan horse was wheeled into the American living room, the video cassette recorder. The battle between formats, VHS and Betamax, was won by VHS largely because it could hold a longer movie. This seemingly mundane detail would have explosive consequences for the adult industry. The VCR took pornography out of the seedy, male-only grindhouse theaters and made it a private, domestic affair. The neighborhood video store, with its innocuous, family-friendly front and its curtained-off adults-only section in the back, became a fixture in every town. It democratized access, and in doing so, created a market of staggering size. The industry was about to transform from a fringe enterprise into a multi-billion-dollar behemoth. This new world, the world of home video, demanded a new kind of star. It needed performers who could connect with an audience through the small screen, who had charisma, and who could project a persona that was both desirable and, crucially, intriguing. The industry was on the cusp of its golden age, a period of unprecedented profitability and notoriety. It was a world of immense opportunity, but also one of immense peril, shadowed by exploitation and hypocrisy. It was the perfect stage for a woman who seemed uniquely equipped not just to navigate it, but to conquer it. The woman who would become this platinum queen was born Dorothea Hundley in 1954 in Radford, Virginia. Her origins were a universe away from the neon-lit world she would one day command. Raised in a working-class family, her childhood was shaped by the rhythms and expectations of the rural South. But even as a young girl, there were hints of the formidable woman she would become. She possessed a striking beauty and a sharp mind, a combination that made her stand out. In her teens, she won the title of Miss Pulaski County, a classic rite of passage for a beautiful small-town girl. In retrospect, it was her first taste of public performance, of crafting a persona to win approval. It was also a glimpse into the limited avenues available to ambitious young women in that time and place. Following a conventional path, she married young. But the life of a homemaker quickly proved to be a cage for a spirit as restless as hers. The marriage was short-lived, and Dorothea found herself a divorcee in her early 20s, facing the world alone. She took a job on the assembly line at a Zenith television factory. This period is critical to understanding her psychology. It was a life of repetitive, unfulfilling labor, of financial precariousness, of seeing her future shrink before her eyes. It was here, in the hum of the factory, that a deep resolve was forged. The resolve to be independent, the resolve to be in control of her own destiny, the resolve to never again be at the mercy of a man or an employer. This experience didn't break her. It tempered her. It was the fire that created the steel of her will. Driven by a desperate need for change, she left Virginia behind. Like countless dreamers before her, she headed west to California. She didn't arrive with a plan to enter the adult industry. She was simply seeking a bigger life. She worked mundane jobs, including at a bookstore, soaking in the energy of Los Angeles. It was through a series of chance encounters and her own burgeoning curiosity that she discovered the world of nude modeling. It was a way to make good money, to leverage an asset she possessed. But for Dorothea, it was more than that. It was a business transaction, and she was a pragmatic businesswoman. From modeling, the leap to film was a short one. By the time she made her first adult film in the late 1970s, she was not a naive, exploited girl. She was a grown woman, a divorcee who had worked on a factory floor. She entered the industry with her eyes wide open, viewing it not as a path to love or acceptance, but as a career path, a means to an end, financial independence and absolute control over her own life. She needed a name, a professional identity to separate the work from the self. She chose Seka. The name was sharp, exotic, and memorable. It was the first brick laid in the construction of her public fortress. Dorothiea Hundley was the private individual. Seika was the professional entity, the product. This separation was a psychological necessity, a way to protect her core identity from the often brutal realities of the business. Her impact was immediate and undeniable. In an industry populated by performers who often appeared passive or subservient, Seka was a bolt of lightning. It wasn't just her iconic look, the shock of platinum blonde hair, the piercing eyes, the statuesque physique. It was her attitude. She radiated an almost unnerving level of self-assurance. When she looked at the camera, she wasn't inviting pity or projecting vulnerability. She was issuing a challenge. She met the viewer's gaze with an intelligence and a confidence that was entirely new. Audiences were captivated. She quickly became the most in-demand performer in the business, but her revolution wasn't just happening on screen, it was happening behind the scenes. She treated her career not as an art form, but as a business, and she was its CEO. Stories of her professionalism and her hard-nosed negotiating tactics became industry legend. She was famously one of the very first performers, male or female, to demand and receive the right to choose her on-screen partners. This was a seismic shift in the power dynamics of a film set. She refused to work with anyone she deemed unprofessional, unreliable, or disrespectful. An often told but crucial anecdote perfectly illustrates her method. On an early shoot, a producer attempted to pay her less than the agreed-upon fee. Seka didn't raise her voice. She didn't get emotional. She simply stated the facts of their agreement, packed her bag, and began to walk off the set, ready to let the entire production grind to a halt. The panicked producer immediately capitulated. The message was sent, and it echoed throughout the industry. Seika was a professional who demanded respect. You did not cross her. This reputation for being difficult, which in a woman often means being assertive and self-possessed, was a shield. She understood that in this business you were either a predator or prey, and she chose to be the former. Her on-screen persona mirrored her off-screen business strategy. In films like Blonde Fire or The Seduction of Seka, she wasn't portrayed as a victim. She was the aggressor, the initiator, the one in control of the fantasy. This was a powerful and incredibly marketable archetype. She was selling a fantasy not just to men, but also in a way to women, the fantasy of total sexual agency. Her fame soon bled into the mainstream. At a time when most adult performers were anonymous, Seika became a celebrity. She appeared on daytime talk shows like The Phil Donahue Show and The Merv Griffin Show. These appearances were masterful performances. Facing down skeptical hosts and judgmental audiences, she was cool, articulate, and utterly unapologetic. She spoke of her work in terms of business and choice. "I run my body like a business, and it is a very successful business," was her famous oft-repeated mantra. She was framing her narrative before the world could frame it for her. She was the empowered, liberated woman, a feminist icon to some, a moral scourge to others, but ignored by none. But the fortress she built had a lonely throne. The image of Seka, the powerful, intimidating, untouchable queen, was an incredibly effective professional tool, but it was also a deeply isolating personal prison. Behind the armor, the real woman, Dorothiea Hundley, was paying a steep emotional price. In her shockingly candid 1997 memoir, Inside Seka, she finally revealed the profound disconnect between her public image and her private reality. She wrote of the crushing loneliness that defined her life at the height of her fame. She was adored by millions, but known by almost no one. After a day of performing simulated intimacy on a film set, surrounded by a crew, she would return to an empty, sterile hotel room. The phone wouldn't ring with calls from friends. Because she had so few, relationships were nearly impossible. The men she met were either too intimidated by her powerful persona to approach her as an equal, or they saw her only as a fantasy, a conquest, a story to tell their friends. She recounted heartbreaking stories of dates where she realized the man across the table wasn't interested in Dorothea. He was trying to bag Seika. The constant objectification wasn't just happening on camera, it had bled into every corner of her life. The very image that made her a star had rendered her invisible as a human being. The image had worked, she wrote poignantly, but it had worked too well. The industry itself was a source of constant stress. While she projected control, she still had to navigate a world rife with drug abuse, unprofessionalism, and exploitation. Her rigid standards meant she was often at odds with producers and other performers. She was an island of professionalism in a sea of chaos, and it was an exhausting way to live. Then came the darkest chapter in the industry's history. In the mid-1980s, the AIDS epidemic erupted. The carefree hedonism of the golden age curdled into terror. The virus swept through the adult film community with devastating speed, fueled by denial and a lack of safety protocols. It was a time of immense fear and paranoia. Performers were dying. This is where Seika's pragmatism and steely resolve arguably saved her life and the lives of others. Long before it was standard practice, she became a fierce and vocal advocate for on-set safety and mandatory testing for sexually transmitted diseases. She refused to work in any situation she deemed unsafe. She wielded her star power as a weapon, forcing producers to take the health of their performers seriously. In a time of panic and irresponsibility, she was a voice of cold, hard reason. But this role as a public health crusader added yet another layer of weight to her already burdened shoulders. She wasn't just managing her career, she was fighting for her survival in the most literal sense. The party was well and truly over. The freewheeling, experimental atmosphere on set was replaced by a grim, new reality. Every scene, once an act of playful rebellion, now felt like a high-stakes gamble. The fear was a palpable thing you could almost taste in the air. She described watching friends and colleagues, people she had worked with and known, simply vanish, first getting sick, then disappearing, then word would trickle back that they were gone forever. Her demands for testing and condoms were not met with universal praise. Far from it. In an industry built on fantasy and immediate gratification, she was the one bringing the cold, hard dose of reality. Producers, worried about costs and delays, pushed back. Some performers, caught in denial or their own brand of machismo, resisted the new rules. For a time, her staunch position made her an outcast in certain circles, costing her roles and straining relationships. She was building a fortress of one, but it was the only way she knew how to stay safe. By the mid-80s, the cumulative weight of it all, the loneliness, the objectification, the constant fight against industry chaos, and now the gut-wrenching grief of the plague years had become unbearable. The high-wattage glamour had been stripped away, revealing a hollowed-out core. This wasn't fun anymore. It was a war of attrition. The controversies surrounding Seika were not just personal or professional. They were political. She was a central figure in one of the most heated debates of the 20th century, the feminist sex wars. Her very existence posed a difficult question. On one side, she was hailed by some as a symbol of liberation. Here was a woman who entered a notoriously exploitative industry and, through sheer force of will, bent it to her advantage. She owned her sexuality, turned it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and never apologized for it. In this view, she was the ultimate post-feminist icon, a woman who had seized the tools of the patriarchy and used them to build her own throne. But on the other side, a powerful wave of anti-pornography feminism, led by figures like Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin, saw her very differently. To them, Seika's control was a dangerous illusion. They argued that the pornographic industry is, by its very nature, an industry of abuse and subjugation. No matter how much power a single woman might seem to wield within it, she is still participating in and profiting from a system that perpetuates violence and objectification against all women. Her success, they contended, didn't challenge the system. It legitimized it, creating the marketable fantasy that exploitation could be empowering. This debate raged throughout the 80s, intensified by the 1986 Mies Commission report on pornography, a Reagan-era initiative that sought to link pornography directly to violent crime. Seka, as the industry's most visible face, became a lightning rod for both sides. She was simultaneously a symbol of female power and a symbol of female degradation. The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in the complex, murky space in between. She was not a political theorist. She was a pragmatist. She was a survivor who crafted the tools she needed to prosper in the world she found herself in. The fact that she remains such a complicated and debated figure is a testament to the power of the paradox she embodied. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Seika had achieved everything possible in her profession. She had won every award, commanded the highest salary, and her name was a global brand. She had reached the top of the mountain, and from that lonely, windswept peak, she looked out and saw nothing more that she wanted. The decision to leave was not a singular event. It was a slow, dawning realization. The work had become a joyless, mechanical act. The loneliness was a constant ache. The AIDS crisis had irrevocably scarred the industry, replacing any lingering sense of glamour with a grim awareness of mortality. She described feeling spiritually hollow, a ghost haunting her own successful life. The money, the fame, the power, it was all an elaborate cage. She began a quiet internal rebellion. She started reading voraciously books on spirituality, philosophy, anything that offered a glimpse of a life with deeper meaning. She began to systematically untangle herself from the industry. She finished her last few contractual film obligations, her mind already elsewhere. There was no grand farewell tour, no tearful press conference. That would have been a performance for the benefit of the public. Her departure was for her and her alone, in a move that was the ultimate expression of the control she had fought so hard for. She orchestrated her own disappearance. Around 1993, she packed her bags, left the chaos of California, and moved to the quiet suburbs of Kansas City. She shed the name, the image, and the entire identity she had so painstakingly built. She was no longer Seka. She was finally and fully Dorothiea Hundley again. For years, she became a myth. Where is Seika? The question echoed among her fans and in the industry she left behind. The rumors were wild. The reality was profoundly simple. She was living. She married, found companionship, and delighted in the anonymity of a normal life. For a time, she hosted a local quirky cable access show called Let's Talk About Sex, a satirical tongue-in-cheek nod to her past, but on her own terms, with her own humor. She was deconstructing her own legend piece by piece. Her 1997 memoir was the final act of this process. It was not a plea for a comeback. It was a final report from a distant country. It was her opportunity to set the record straight, to explain the why of her vanishing act. The book is a startlingly honest document about the corrosive nature of fame and the human soul's deep need for authenticity. She had to forgive herself, she explained, for the choices she had made and learn to love the person she had been before the fame. I had to learn to love Dorothea, she said, the person I had left behind for so long. The historical significance of the Seka saga is more potent today than ever. In our current age of reality television and social media influencers, where individuals meticulously curate public personas and commodify their private lives for followers and likes, Seka's story serves as a vital cautionary prologue. She was a pioneer of the personal brand, but she was also one of the first to discover its profound spiritual cost. Her journey is a testament to the fact that mass adoration is a poor substitute for genuine connection, and that a curated image can starve the authentic self. Her legacy within the adult industry is that of a trailblazer who redefined what a female performer could be: a businesswoman, a negotiator, a brand. But her broader cultural legacy is that of her great escape. She refused to become a cliché. She would not be the tragic star who faded into addiction or poverty. She would not be the bitter recluse, forever haunted by her past. She chose a third option, a quiet, dignified reinvention. Her decision to walk away from it all, at the very peak of her power, remains her most radical, most inspiring act. In a world that relentlessly consumes its idols, she refused to be consumed. She authored her own story from beginning to end, and the final chapter was her masterpiece. In the final analysis, the grand, tumultuous story of Seika is not really about sex or fame. It is a profound and timeless story about the search for the self. It is about a woman who, out of a deep need for safety and control, constructed one of the most powerful public identities of her time. She played the role of the queen so brilliantly that the whole world believed her, and perhaps for a time she believed it herself. But her true victory was not in winning the crown. It was in finding the strength to take it off. Dorothiea Hundley's journey teaches us that the greatest power we can ever wield is the power to define who we are and to grant ourselves the grace of a new beginning. Her story is not a tragedy of a star who was lost, but the quiet, enduring triumph of a woman who found her way home. She bequeathed the glittering, complicated myth of Seika to the world, but she saved the most precious thing for herself: the peaceful, authentic life of Dorothea. And in that simple, courageous choice, she left an unforgettable lesson on the true measure of a life. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.